Musical musings, musical musings, musical musings, musical musings.
Hello and good afternoon. Welcome back to the latest episode of Musical Musings. We air this program every Wednesday at 1 p.m., and we broadcast it to you from Rajamacon University of Technology, Pranakon. I will be bringing this program to you in two parts. In our first part, I will introduce a performer and a song to you, and we will discuss the main themes of the song. You know, what it's all about. We will then go ahead and listen to the song, and when we come back for the second part of our program, we will go through the words of the song, the lyrics, and we will analyze anything that could be difficult to understand, any difficult vocabulary, difficult slang, idioms. An idiom is like a saying that doesn't mean what the words say. So any difficult idioms, anything that's hard to understand. After that, that'll be the end of our program, so we'll have the news and latest updates from the university as usual.
Musical musings, musical musings, musical musings, musical musings.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Gary Gray, and I am your host for the Musical Musings program. I am an American English teacher here at Rajamacon University of Technology, Pranakon. I have been here teaching at the university for approximately 7 years. Actually, a little bit longer than that now. Okay, so for today's song, we are going to be doing Dust in the Wind by the band Kansas. All right, so before we get to the song, let's talk a little bit about the band. It will not surprise you to know, well, it may, because you may not have ever heard of it, but I was going to say it may not surprise you to know that the band was formed in Kansas, in Topeka, Kansas in 1973. The reason I took that back and said, well, maybe it would surprise you, is you may not have heard of Kansas. Where is Kansas? What is Kansas? It is a state in the United States. It is a fairly small state in population. It's actually a very big state. It's quite a big state. Most of the states in the middle of the U.S. are quite big because there's a lot of wide open space. So there's no need to split it up into little areas. For example, in the eastern part of the U.S., especially the Northeast, lots of big cities. Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York City, Boston. We cut most of those states up into pretty small pieces. Pennsylvania and New York are pretty big. They're pretty big. But most of those states are pretty small. In the central part of the U.S., we have big states. But a lot of that's because there are fewer people. So Kansas is not a big state in population. So it's possible you have not heard of it. All of you have heard of New York. All of you have heard of California. Probably all of you have heard of Texas. All of you have probably heard of Florida. There may be a few other states you know. Maybe you know Virginia or Massachusetts. Massachusetts, it's weird. It's kind of a long name. But the former king was born in Massachusetts. It's also very famous for its education, so a lot of people go there. That's why the former king was born there, because his father was going to school in Massachusetts. So maybe you've heard of that state. Maybe you've heard of Hawaii, because it's islands. But maybe you have not heard of Kansas. All right, so Kansas. Big state, size, small state, population. In the middle of America. In fact, it's almost right in the middle. if you were to stick a pin right in the center of America. I've seen this done before, actually. I'm not sure if it would be in Kansas. You might hit Nebraska instead, but it's really close. It's really close to Kansas. All right, so they formed in Topeka, Kansas in 1973. Most of the bands we do on this show are early. Been around a long time. They go back a long time. No difference here. In fact, for our program, this might actually be a little bit late. A lot of the bands we've done have formed like in the 1960s. These guys formed in 1973. And it's really weird because in preparing for the show, you know, I'm not a music expert. I love music, love listening to it. But I don't have a degree in musical history, so I have to look some things up, do a little research. I have not really figured out the precise history of how this band formed. I read it, and I still don't understand it. There were actually two bands known as Kansas. And so they called themselves Kansas 1 and Kansas 2. The first one formed in 1970. I believe the second one formed in 1971, I believe. I guess they both were in Topeka. I'm not sure. And they must have known each other because they basically ended up merging. So they must have been, I don't know, maybe one group of friends was Kansas 1 and they had other friends over here that said, we're going to make our own band and we're going to use the same name. And so they called, I don't know. I have no idea. I couldn't figure the whole thing out. It's really crazy. They have kind of a crazy history for how they formed. But the merged band, if that's really what it was, and I don't think it was all the members. I don't think all the members merged. I think some members went off and did their own thing. Otherwise, it would be a really big band, right? Because you're going to have two bands all together in one. So they merged in 1973, and that's the band we now know as Kansas. And last week, we talked about the band Steppenwolf. I told you how they were pretty consistently performing. These guys have been even more consistent. They did form a few years later than Steppenwolf, so there's less time to cover there. But these guys have been really consistent performers. They took a brief break in 1984 and 1985, well, it wasn't 1984 and 85. It was only part of each of those years. So they were only off for a year and a half, something like that. That's it. They're still performing today. Now, as you can imagine, having formed in 1973, that's 51 years ago. So they did change their lineup quite a bit. And we talked about this with Steppenwolf as well last week because of the continuity in their group. You know how I am about bands changing band members. If you end up with none of your original members, you're not that band. You can't call yourself that band. We saw that several weeks ago with the group Guess Who. Has none of the same band members from the original band, and they're still calling themselves Guess Who. In fact, they're actually getting sued for it. So one of the good things about Kansas is they do have some of their original members still in the band. So very consistent. Had a brief break there, and during that break, that's kind of when they switched up some of their members. Of course, I believe they've changed a couple members along the way as well. Again, I don't know all 100% of their exact history, but I believe they've switched up a few members other than that as well. But it was mostly during that break. They kind of broke up briefly and then switched out some people, switched in some people, got back together in 85, and now they've continued on. And they did keep some of their original members, and some of them are still with them now. So they're still performing. They're still around. I'm sure they must be getting kind of old if they've been around for, 51 years? And if you figure they started with Kansas 1 and Kansas 2 before that, a couple years before that, so been around 53, 54 years performing. Even if they started really young, like when they were 17, if they've been around 53 years, that puts them at 70. So, yeah, they're getting pretty old. These days, people tend to live a little bit longer, so that's not tremendously old, but it's getting there. They're at least 70 years old, the original members at least. Then when they switched some out, they might have switched in some younger members. So probably not everyone in the band is 70 years old, but at least a few of them are. Okay, so that's the band. And the song we're doing today from the band is their number one hit. Now, I hesitate a little bit when I say that because it's their only song to be in the top 10 in the U.S., which really surprises me. They do have a lot of good songs that really aren't really that popular, but they have at least one other one. Carry On My Wayward Son is the name of it, which I'm really shocked never made the top 10. In fact, when I looked it up, I believe it wasn't even that close. I could be wrong about that now that I'm remembering it. But it wasn't top 10. Carry On My Wayward Son never made the top 10 in the U.S. The song we're doing today, Dust in the Wind, did. It got to number 6 in the U.S. And by the way, the reason I talk about the U.S. charts, I have explained this one time before on one of our shows. It's not because I'm American and so I'm biased. No. America is really the number one audience for music in the world. English is pretty much the most common spoken language. Obviously, there's more Indians than there are Americans. There are more Chinese people than there are Americans. But English is spoken more outside of their own country. There are a lot of other English-speaking countries like Canada, Britain, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, sort of. They have kind of two languages there. Plus, if you're learning a foreign language, it's the most common foreign language for non-English countries to be learning. So most groups want to perform their music in English. Most Europeans understand English, so even if you're in Europe, you can do it in English. And the largest English-speaking country is the U.S. So where most musicians really want to make it is in the U.S. That's not always true. You have some European groups, European bands who are perfectly happy to get popular in their own countries. So if they're German, they'll sing their music in German, and sometimes, that'll even spread around. There's a heavy metal band called Rammstein. I believe it's pronounced Rammstein. I always get that confused. I think it's called Rammstein. There's a German band called Rammstein. Heavy metal. A little bit crazy. We probably will never have their music on this program because it's almost all in German. Yet they've gotten popular outside Germany. Even though people don't understand the lyrics to their songs because they don't understand German, they like the music. So I'm not saying that none of these other bands that sing in other languages can get popular outside of their own country. We did, in fact, on this program, we did a song by The Who, not The Who, WHO. We've done them as well, but The Who HU, which is a Mongolian metal band. I had to pick a specific one of their songs because there's one song that they combine with English. So I had to do the song that had some English in it there. So, yeah, there are other bands singing in other languages that get popular elsewhere. K-pop is very popular here in Thailand. Singing Korean, still popular. But mostly, bands that want to make it big try to make it big in the U.S. That's why I use the U.S. charts. Okay, so I explained that, went a long explanation about that, but I just wanted you to understand why I'm talking about, it was number 6 in the charts in the U.S. You might think, who cares about the U.S.? We're here in Thailand. This is a measure of how popular songs are. Okay, so it got to number 6. I'm surprised it didn't even get higher because it's a really good song. So again, the name of the song, once again, is Dust in the Wind. It came out on their 3rd album, I believe it is. I didn't write down which album, surprisingly. Well, I wrote down the album name, Point of No Return, in 1977. I've spoken a lot recently about how so many of these bands, their number 1 hit comes out on their very first album, which is really kind of surprising. This actually came out on their 3rd album. So the name of the album, again, was Point of No Return. They spell no, K-N-O-W. When you use the saying point of no return, it's no, N-O. So, playing with the meaning there on the album name. So that was in 1977. All right, the theme of the song is very simple. It's a little hard to tell from the name of the song, Dust in the Wind. What is Dust in the Wind? But when you hear the lyrics, it's all we are is dust in the wind. So we are dust in the wind. It's pretty easy to understand. What it's talking about is mortality. What that word means is that it's kind of an acknowledgement, an understanding of the fact that we're all going to die someday. It's an interesting song because a song about death, that should be really a sad song. It isn't really a sad song, though. It's really just about accepting that fact. So it's kind of a peaceful song. And in fact, they brought this, they came up with this song by bringing together certain ideas that come from the Bible, which of course is the main religious text in America, since most people there are Christians, came from a Japanese war epic, and it also came from some Native American poetry. And so they all three of them have this concept of turning into dust when you die. In other words, when you think about it, when something rots, I mean, it's gross when it's rotting, right? But I mean, after thousands and thousands of years, it just turns into dirt. Probably not even thousands. After tens and tens and tens of years, it basically just turns into dirt. So it's not really dust, but it's the same idea. It's the same idea. So that's what they mean when they talk about dust. So it's really just about this fact that, that's what happens with life. Eventually, it ends. And it's not meant to be a sad song. I think that's one of the reasons why it got so popular, is because it's actually a peaceful song. Even though it seems sad, all we are is dust in the wind. Sounds like, ugh, well, that's depressing. All we are is dust in the wind. Ugh. Sounds like a depressing song. No. It's meant to be peaceful. All right, so let's get to the song. As always, anyone joining us on YouTube, we will give you the link in the upper right-hand corner because we cannot embed the video. But anyone who's listening on streaming or on the radio, all you're doing is listening. And we can put the song in there, so you should be able to listen just fine. All right, let's get to the song.
Musical musings, musical musings, musical musings, musical musings.
Welcome back, everyone. All right, so that was Dust in the Wind by Kansas. And that song is a song about mortality. And again, I explained it in the first half, but if you don't understand that word, mortality means death. But when we talk about the word mortality itself, yeah, it is about death, yes, but it's more about the fact that it happens to everyone. We're all going to die someday. It's a sad thing. I've had people I love die. I've had pets I loved die. Not saying it's a good thing, but it's something we have to kind of accept. It happens. Okay, so let's go through the lyrics of the song. I close my eyes only for a moment, and the moment's gone. Oi, right away. That's very philosophical when you think about that. That's kind of a deep meaning. You close your eyes only for a moment. That moment's gone. You can't get that time back. It's talking about how important every minute is. And that's, again, another reason why I think this song is actually fairly positive. It's telling you to basically live your life. Live your life. Go out and do something. The song we did last week. Much harder song. But it kind of had the same theme. Born to be Wild was about living your life. It's kind of saying the same thing here. Close your eyes only for a moment. And the moment's gone. All my dreams pass before my eyes, a curiosity. Okay, this one maybe seems a little sadder. All your dreams just pass before your eyes. In other words, they didn't happen. You have all these dreams, these things you want to do. They don't happen. And it says a curiosity. Something that's a curiosity is like something that seems a little odd. So I think sometimes it's a little hard to understand what they're trying to mean with some of these lines. But what I think they're trying to say here is it's almost like it doesn't matter. So it's kind of weird that he even had those dreams. I think that's what he's saying there. It's curious. Why would I have that dream? Okay, so when something passes before your eyes, basically means it's over. Passes. So now it's gone. So all my dreams pass before my eyes, a curiosity. Dust in the wind. All they are is dust in the wind. Okay, so once again, we talked about this in the first part, about what this means with dust. When you die, eventually your whole body really turns to dirt. So I'm not really sure how easily it's going to be picked up by the wind, but a lot of times in these stories, these books that they referenced for the song, like the Bible, like the Japanese war epic, like the Native American poetry, it actually talks about dust and not dirt. It says you turn into dust. It's probably not accurate, but whatever. We're talking about dust. So if you don't know the difference between dust and dirt, dirt is like what's on the ground. So it's kind of thicker and heavier. It's sort of the same material, kind of, I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure what dust is made of. Dust is made of lots of things. But dust is the much smaller stuff. Sometimes you see it floating in the air. If you don't clean your house for a long time. You might like run your fingers across the top of a table and there may be a lot of dust on it. That's what dust is, the stuff that's like just kind of slowly builds up if you don't clean. So that's what they're talking about. So it is something that can get picked up in the wind. So when it says all they are is dust in the wind, so they're just gone. They're just gone. So that's what it's saying there. So his dreams, all my dreams pass before my eyes of curiosity, dust in the wind. All they are is dust in the wind. So his dreams are gone. That part, like I said, maybe does seem a little bit sad, right? All your dreams are gone. But again, I think it's about trying to live your life. I think it actually has a positive intention to the song. Okay, and we move on here. It's a pretty short song, so this isn't going to take too long to get through here. Same old song, just a drop of water in an endless sea. Okay. So just a drop. So same old song. When you use that saying, that's the same old song and dance you might hear, is the same as it means it's the same as everything else. The same old song. It's the same thing as everything. So everything is dust in the wind, right? Just a drop of water in an endless sea. So again, it's talking about how it doesn't matter, which is the same idea, because you're going to be dust in the wind eventually, so it doesn't really matter. So again, just live your life. This is, I think this song is actually intended to be positive. It sounds a little negative, right? Doesn't matter. You're just going to die. You're just dust in the wind. Now here it's saying you're just a drop of water in an endless sea. It's a metaphor, but that one, I think you can figure it out, right? You're a drop of water in an endless sea. So it doesn't really matter. All we do crumbles to the ground, though we refuse to see. Okay. Once again, this one I think sounds a little bit negative. But I think it's encouraging you to understand that, life is short, to enjoy it. So in other words, it's saying that we refuse to see that everything crumbles to the ground. In other words, all we do, you put up a building, doesn't matter how good the building is. Eventually, it's going to come down. Might take 100 years. If it's built really well and it's just like a house out in the countryside. We have some in the U.S. that have been around for 200 years. They have some in Europe that have been around for 400 or 500 years. But eventually, they're going to come down. Now, it's not really talking about buildings necessarily, because it says all we do crumbles to the ground. But the point is that happens to everything. Everything ends. Everything's going to come to an end. Everything's going to go away. This little cute program we're doing here, it'll stop when I go away. Nobody's going to know about it in 100 years since we're doing this little show here at the university. Just crumbles to the ground. And it says, and the reason I think they add in here, though we refuse to see, is because it's encouraging you to see that. In other words, all we do, all those things we do, we put, as humans, too much importance into them. Like, oh my God, everything is the end of the world. Oh, like when you take a test at school, my students, if they get a bad grade on a test, they're always like, oh, teacher, how can I fix my score? And I have to tell them, look, it's one test. We have another test coming up. We have the final exam coming up. You have your homework. You have your class participation. You have your attendance. You have all these different ways you can improve your score. Don't worry about it. This is kind of saying the same thing. These things don't matter. Each of these little things don't matter. But we refuse to see, so it's encouraging us to see it. When you refuse to do something, it means you are not doing it because you don't want to do it. To refuse to do something. So we don't want to look past what we're doing now. It's so important to us. What this is saying is, no, it's not that important. So again, this sounds negative, but I think it's intended to be positive. Because what it's trying to do is get you to look at life and say, okay, these individual things, all we do crumbles to the ground. They're just not that important. Live your life. Enjoy your life. Okay, then we have, it's not really a chorus, we just say dust in the wind, all we are is dust in the wind. All right, now we get to the next chorus, and it's basically the next verse, and it's basically the last one. Like I said, it's a fairly short song. It says, don't hang on. Nothing lasts forever but the earth and sky. Okay? When you say hang on, when you're hanging on to something, that means you're not letting something go. You're not. So again, this is about, it's not important. Move on. Sometimes, for example, you might be in a bad relationship. You really want it to work out. You really think you love them. If they're not showing you the respect you deserve, don't hang on. Move on.